before listening to this sermon, if you could please read from the book of Matthew, verses 13 to 16. So this morning we're going to look at three things. First of all, we're going to look at Jesus' promise declared. Jesus' promise declared. I'd like you to think back to the last sermon you heard on the subject of evangelism, or witnessing, or the importance of Christians reaching out to the world. Chances are that the preacher quoted Matthew 28, "Go and make disciples." Or perhaps they mentioned Jesus' words in the book of Acts, "You will be my witnesses." Or perhaps they quoted from these words in Matthew chapter 5, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." Think back to the applications of that sermon. Reach out, do evangelism, share the gospel. How did you feel after that sermon? If you were to give yourself a mark out of 10 for how much you obeyed that sermon, how would you score yourself? I think an apology is in order. Not an apology from you to God, but an apology from me to you. Whenever preachers like myself speak from these verses, we read Jesus' words as commands. Make disciples, be Jesus' witnesses, be salt and light. Preachers command obedience, and we all leave feeling guilty. However, these words of Jesus are not primarily commands. They are all promises. And when it comes to any act of obedience in the Christian faith, faith always comes first. Jesus promised, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you. You will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth." Jesus promised, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. I am with you always to the very end of the age." Jesus is promising to provide everything. Jesus is promising to overcome every obstacle. Jesus is promising that he will use his church to reach people in every corner of the world. Jesus is promising to be with us every day till this certain outcome is fulfilled. Faith in these promises always comes before obedience to Jesus' command. When you see people obeying these commands, it is because they've believed these things first. Just think about it. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." Jesus is promising that his church will be the most influential organization ever. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." Jesus is promising that he will use the likes of you and me to make sure everyone in the world knows his name. Just think about it. Do you think these two statements sounded realistic to Jesus' first followers? Do you think they felt equipped for the task that Jesus was giving them? Do you think they could see past the hundreds of spiritual, physical, and social barriers that stood in the way? Likewise, do you rank yourself as one of the Times magazine's 100 most influential people? Or do you feel your mundane life and abilities stand no chance of having any influence on anyone at all? If Jesus said he was going to use this church, your church, to reach the people of North Shields, what fact would you tell him that you think would make that promise impossible? You know, unless we have faith in Jesus' promises, none of us are ever going to obey his commands to go and make disciples. That's why Jesus left us not only with commands, he left us with promises as well. Jesus did not say, "Oh, Bill Gates, you come over here. Your organization has had a global impact. Jeff Bezos, you come here. You've made Amazon what it is today. Mark Zuckerberg, you come over here. You've made sure everybody knows the name of Facebook." If Jesus was using these people to found a world-changing organization, then a simple command would have been enough. Mark, Jeff, Bill, you know what you need to do. Now go and do it. That would have been all that these guys needed. A simple command. They had what it takes. But Jesus was not leaving his great commission in the hands of strong, influential, and skillful people. He was speaking to the likes of you and me. And so, rather than just giving a command, he spoke a promise as well. You are the salt of the earth. I.e., this is the type of massive influence you are going to have. You are the light of the world. I.e., I am going to use you to make me known to the world. Jesus isn't here trying to give us a self-esteem boost. Go on, I believe in you. Jesus isn't giving us a self-esteem boost. Jesus is wanting us to look past our weaknesses and to believe and trust in him. Just as God in Genesis said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Just as God, by his infinite power, fulfilled these words, so too Jesus' words in Matthew 5 will be fulfilled by God's infinite power as well. As Paul said in the book of 2 Corinthians, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ." But we, that is, those who continue this light-bearing ministry, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. God will use the seemingly feeble efforts of weak people to overcome every barrier in order to change the eternal destinies of millions. This is a reason to do at least something as a church in the way of evangelism, even if it isn't the most outwardly impressive. This is a reason to take the £10 that you might give to world missions seriously. This little amount you can give may not win you a Nobel Prize, but it really will influence people's eternities for good. This is a reason to spend time praying for God to do things, even when you can't always see the connection between your prayers and how God is using them. This is a reason to do something in your life to share your faith, if you're a Christian, with others. No matter what type of personality you are, and no matter what skills you do or don't have, Jesus is promising that you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. He can use the likes of you and I. So that's firstly Jesus' promise declared, and now the potential danger of all. All this being said, there are still two potential dangers that we all need to avoid. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Now, just to be clear, salt does not lose its saltiness. If you don't believe me, go up into your attic when you get home, bring down the salt cellar that great-grandma Betty left you, and do this. Get a bit of that salt and taste it, and you'll discover that salt always tastes salty. It doesn't have a best before date when it ceases to taste like salt. But imagine for a moment I was to offer you a lovely bacon butty. It smells appetizing. It looks appetizing. Now some of you are salivating just over thinking about it. But imagine that you've got your bacon butty, you've got your salt to make it even more tasty, and then I get a little bit of sand that I've taken from the beach. I've specially chosen a bit of the beach which dogs like to wee on, and then I get that sand and I add it to the salt. Mix it all together. A bit of nice salt, a bit of nice sand, and a bit of nice dog's urine. And then I add it to that bacon butty. Are you going to eat it now? What are you going to do with it? You're going to throw that sandwich away. As Jesus said, that sandwich, that bacon butty, with all the salt on it, is going to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Basically, salt is of no positive use when it's contaminated with some impurity. Simply add some dog urine soaked sand from the beach, and all the effort of frying, seasoning, and serving that bacon butty are going to be undone. In much the same way, the church, like salt, has the potential to massively influence the world. The lives of individual Christians have the potential to positively draw people to the Christian faith. But when the church is contaminated, perhaps through being caught up in a sex scandal, or when a preacher is shown to be financially manipulating other people, or when someone meets a Christian who is a hypocrite, or a gossip, or unkind, what happens? History has proved Jesus right. No matter what good has gone before, people will immediately turn their back on the Christian message the moment they meet an unchristlike Christian, or the moment they attend an unchristlike church. They might have been literally salivating over the gospel before, ready to accept the offer of God's salvation. But, like urine-saturated sand sprinkled on a sandwich, all the good that has gone before will immediately be undone. As Jesus said, but if the salt loses its saltiness, that is, through contamination with gossip or unkindness or hypocrisy or dishonesty or any other form of sexual or financial corruption. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? The positive influence will not be regained. It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. All the efforts of drawing someone to Jesus would have been lost. History has proved Jesus right, very sadly. Very sadly, this kind of thing does happen. For this reason, every church, including mine, including yours, has to think about what impression a newcomer walking in would go away with. They will listen to your actions and attitudes more than they will listen to the preacher. Also, if you are the only Christian that somebody knows, your influence on someone else is massive. That person's view of God will largely be shaped by their view of you. How interested in other people are you? Do you respond to irritating people with grace? How easily do you compromise? Do you speak about your weaknesses and errors honestly? Does your life back up what you believe? If we want to remain salty, these are the kinds of difficult questions we need to be asking ourselves. Has my life been contaminated with anything that would undermine any positive impact I might otherwise have had? That's one danger. Now the second potential danger in verse 14. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. Now, all lights serve one of two purposes. Firstly, lights are made to be seen. For example, traffic lights and the green light above a fire exit. These lights are made to be seen. Secondly, lights allow things to be seen. For example, sunlight allows us to see our surroundings. And when lightning strikes, for a split second, you can see everything around you. God placed His church, the light of the world, in the world for these same two purposes. God placed His church in the world to be seen and to make God known. I'm sure you'd be very frustrated if they forgot to remove the traffic light covers after they fixed them. When they're working on some traffic lights, they put a cover over the traffic lights and so you can't see the light. Imagine how frustrated you would be if they left the covers on after they'd fixed the lights. In fact, if they covered up traffic lights like that, you'd be really frustrated if the traffic light said, "Oh, I'd quite like staying under this cover. It's nice and warm, it's waterproof, and I like keeping a low profile and remaining unseen." If a traffic light said that, you'd tell him, "Get back to doing your job, Mr. Traffic Light. Get that cover off. Your job is to be seen, not to remain hidden from the world." Traffic lights have been placed on our roads to be seen. And God has placed His church in the world for the same reason. We're not to keep a low profile, never interacting with the world around us. We're not to remain behind the cover of Christian meetings and our safe church building. God placed us in the world as lights to be seen. As Jesus said, a town on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. A town on a hill can be seen because of the collective lights of every individual house. All those lights shining together mean that the town cannot be missed. In much the same way, no one will miss out on hearing about Jesus when every individual Christian interacts with the world around them. No one will miss out on hearing about Jesus when every church does something to keep some kind of profile in the community. So some thoughts to think about. What contact do you currently have with non-Christians? Make the most of them. What things could you do to make your life more visible? Could you join a group? Could you be the one who initiates meeting up with friends? Could you say yes when you're invited to a social event? God placed us in the world as lights to be seen. Something else to think about it. What profile does your church have in the community? If it has no profile in the community, then it's going to have no impact on that community either. And thirdly, your purpose described. God placed us in the world to make Him and His Son visible. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." And He continued to say that people do not light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. If you read in John's Gospel, you will hear Jesus repeatedly described as the light of the world. Jesus described himself as the light of the world. Then John described Jesus as the light of the world because of his role in making God visible to the world. So who is the light of the world? Jesus, like it says in John's Gospel, or the church, like Matthew records Jesus as saying here? Who is the light of the world? Jesus or us? Well, what is the light of the world during the daytime? It's the sun. And what is the light of the world at night, when the sun is absent? It's the moon. The moon provides light to the world in the absence of the sun. In much the same way, Jesus is the light of the world. He revealed God's goodness to the world and showed us what God is like. But how are people to know what God is like in the absence of Jesus? How are people to know that God is good? In these verses, Jesus describes us as the light of the world, because in Jesus' absence, we have a role in making the invisible God visible. We have a role in making God known. Part of this comes through our words, for when we share the gospel message with others, people discover what God is like through the actions and words of Jesus, his Son. However, Jesus' emphasis in these verses is on our actions, not our words. Jesus said, "Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." People will never hear, touch, or see Jesus. People will never be on the receiving end of Jesus' kindness this side of eternity. But people will come into contact with you. People will be on the receiving end of your actions. And it is in these opportunities that Jesus wants us to make God's glory known. Does God care? Is God kind? Most people won't find the answers to these questions through a book. Most people will first find answers to these questions through you. Do you care? Is your response to suffering to get involved and help? Other questions people might have. Is God gracious? Does God forgive? Most people will never come into contact with a 30-minute sermon on these subjects. But most people will see 30 seconds of a Christian responding to someone who really irritated them. How do they respond to those who irritate them? Is their life a good testimony to the grace of God to all? Is God the kind of God who we can approach? Does he send away imperfect people? Well, if you hide your weaknesses and make out that you've got it all together, people will never discover the true message of Christianity. Instead, they'll think Christianity is all about self-righteous people hiding behind their hypocrisy and going to church dressed in smart clothes. Whereas if we admit to being sinful people, in the process of being fixed, people will understand something of what Christianity is all about. So let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.